Welcome back to Big Banter, your home for everything and anything Big Ten, and our show especially, every gambling piece of advice that you need to know for the Big Ten. We are Big Bookie. Now, getting into this week, we had our first week of college football playoff rankings, and I just, off the top of the show, I really wanted to hear what your guys' thoughts were. We had two Big Ten teams ranked within the top four. Do you think it'll hold? And what is the likelihood that you guys think of two teams getting into this college football playoff? Brant, since you're on my screen, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's gonna have to be a lot of chaos like what happened last season for those two teams to get in. It's very, very likely that Michigan and Ohio State, one finishes 12-0 as the Big Ten champion, and one finishes 11-1. I just don't see Michigan losing to Penn State just the way that both those teams have been playing so far. And I don't see another game Ohio State loses until maybe that Michigan game that really could go either way. But even if that is the case, that one loss is going to be a very good loss for whoever it is that loses that game. So they're going to have a great resume, but you're going to have a Pac-12 champion who either is Washington with 0 losses or it probably is a one loss, maybe Oregon team. As long as none of those teams falter along the way, there's no reason that you're not putting the Pac-12 champion into that playoff. Florida State probably going to run the table, probably going to win the ACC championship. Now they always could lose a game to maybe a Louisville or something along those lines. If that happens, that opens the door for two Big Ten teams. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think Florida State gets in there, and then Georgia probably going to walk in the SEC. But hey, there's still a lot of football to be played. The crazier things have happened. So that there's definitely a possibility that we do see two Big Ten teams again.
I love it. Yeah, no, I think a lot of chaos does have to happen. But Brandon, love to hear what your initial reaction was when you saw those top four teams coming into this week.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad to see that the community thinks resumes matter. This is a week by week thing. It's not going to hold every week as it is. Michigan has the hardest schedule remaining. So I mean, can Ohio State hold on to the number one spot if they look amazing the rest of the way going into Ann Arbor? I think there's a very high chance. But if Ohio State is number one going to Ann Arbor, I think me and Chris have talked about this. A playoff spot is just about locked up so long as Florida State and Washington aren't both undefeated. I'd say it's actually very not as unlikely as you think that two Big Ten teams once again make it to the playoff this year. If we have a one-loss Pac-12 champ, depending on how Oregon does look going into that final game, I think Ohio State, again, if they're number one going into the last week before the conference championship games, I think they have their spot locked up. So it'll be interesting. But if Ohio State beats Michigan and Michigan's second going into that, I think that there's not going to be two Big Ten teams. So we'll see what happens.
Wow. So you think if Michigan doesn't pull off the win in Ann Arbor, that's a very good take. I love that because I think that stands true. I don't think they've played enough. Obviously, you mentioned that they have the hardest schedule to finish the season, but up to this point, they really haven't played anyone. So that's a great tidbit there. And I would have to agree with you and Chris because it just their strengths of schedule, if they go in and lose to their only one of their biggest games of the year outside of Penn State, I just don't know if they have the strength to knock off that one loss FSU team who has an ACC championship, or likewise Oregon if they stumble, or Washington they somehow get there and they win. It'll be interesting coming down the stretch. But Chris, anything to add just off initial shock value, or do you think that the rankings are pretty fair so
Yeah.
far?
I do tend to lean probably more towards what Brandon said I do think there's still a path to two Big Ten teams getting in, as Brandon said. I would say the biggest thing that surprised me would be the SEC bias. I was surprised Penn State fell to 11. I was surprised Mizzou was as high as they were. I was surprised Ole Miss was as high as they were. And I was also surprised by the committee. I think they took resume into account with Ohio State being number one, but then you also see throughout the polls, you have Oklahoma team that beat Texas, that Texas is ranked above them. Granted, the last couple of weeks, Oklahoma hasn't looked great, but you're seeing teams where on the field, Oklahoma beat Texas, but they're ranked behind them. So I was a little bit surprised by the kind of the inconsistency throughout the poll. I'm interested to see what that will affect as far as playoff results, as in we don't know what it'll look like with Ohio State, Michigan losing, because the committee is kind of tough to predict. So it'll be interesting to see down the stretch if that path does become available for the Big Ten. I do think it has to result in a closer OSU Michigan game than the game last year was. I don't think a 23-point blowout will be able to do it.
Yeah, no, I would agree, but I do like your point there with the SEC. I know we are Big Ten focused, but just seeing with this initial first round of CFP rankings, it did seem like a lot of the 17, maybe even like 10 through 15, and then 17 through 25. There were a lot of SEC schools packed in there, so I can see that strength of schedule. I even saw a poll today that had like 4 ranked matchups for Georgia to end the year, all within the top 25. And I'm not saying that it's colluding or anything. It's just it seems to fit the SEC bias that we've become accustomed to within the Big Ten. But we do not have to dwell on that. We've got a very good slate this coming weekend. We've got 7 games of college football, and not to mention college basketball. We're back. This is the show. We're going to give you some Big Ten futures, but we got to stay with it with football. So we'll start with the noon slate. We have the number 1 team in the country going up to Piscataway, facing Rutgers. It's going to be cold. It is going to be ugly. And Ohio State opens as 18 and a half point favorite, and the line is at 42 and a half. Chris, since you're on my screen, I just wanted to hear, where are your thoughts at? Are you going to bet this game? Are you scared? Do you think this line's a little too high?
Yeah, I'm very interested to watch this game. I think it's going to be fun to see a bowl-eligible Rutgers face Ohio State this year. This is probably the best Rutgers team Ohio State has faced since joining the conference. I do like Ohio State's spread here a lot. I think 19 is a big number. I think Rutgers is a trendy team at 6-2. The biggest glaring thing to me with this spread is how the majority of Rutgers production does come from running the football. They have 1,400 yards rushing the ball. They have 1,200 yards passing, 19 touchdowns rushing to 8 touchdowns passing. That formula to me does not bode well against this Ohio State rush defense, as well as from playing behind. I think Ohio State could get up in this game early. I know Ryan Day loves receiving kickoffs and trying to get a 7-0 lead early. And I could see if Ohio State's able to get a 2-score lead in the first quarter against Rutgers, Rutgers not having the firepower or the time to be able to come back and keep that spread close. So I would actually lead Ohio State here to cover again. This is also a team that's really been a machine covering spreads, or at least getting close to it. I know now last week we talked about that 14 and a half perfect 14-point number, but they've really hovered around these spreads a lot. I think with this rush defense, they should be able to get this done.
Yeah, I mean, in the past 3 weeks, they've shut down 2 of the premier rushing offenses in the country, or at least on paper they were supposed to be, with Wisconsin and Penn State. Obviously, you still have to deal with Michigan, who is probably number 1 in the conference, but 2 out of the top 3 is very good over the past 2 weeks. So I would have to agree with you. 18 and a half still scares me. But I would love to hear what Brandon has to say if he's going to be hitting on this line. I know Rutgers has been my team all year, but I don't know if I can take that big of a number. Brandon, where are you at?
I'd agree with Chris. In my notes, I had that Rutgers is just too one-dimensional on offense to be able to go against a defense this stout and be able to compete for 4 quarters. I'm going to also be taking Ohio State minus 18 and a half.
Ooh, we love it. Love it. Brant, anything to add, or are we good to move on to the next game?
Yeah, I actually have a few different thoughts on this game. So that 18 and a half point spread actually really scares me. Ohio State has the Ohio State spreads have been laid out very, very nicely over the past few weeks. Like that Wisconsin one you saw falling right around that number. And this one, I can see it being anywhere from like a 17 to a 21 point Ohio State win. So it's one that really kind of scares me. I think I'd have to lean towards Ohio State probably covering it, just because I don't think Rutgers has anywhere near the offensive firepower to keep up with some of the playmakers that Ohio State has on offense. But that Rutgers defense is not a joke. They've got some good players all over the field. And if they can get some pressure on Kyle McCord, make him look a little shaky like he did against Wisconsin. I'd put the Rutgers defense on par with Wisconsin's defense. I think they can kind of force Kyle into making a few mistakes, maybe even guard Marvin Harrison a bit better than what Wisconsin did. So there's a good chance that Rutgers can cover it. The one thing I'm confident about on this game is the under, and I've been cashing on Buckeye unders over the past few weeks. It's easy. Everybody just keeps thinking Ohio State's going to score points, because that's what they've typically done. But no, this is a defense first football team. This is a team that wins games through its defense and then feeds Marvin Harrison when they need a big play on offense. That they're not an air it out, go for 45 points every game type of team. So under 42.5 looks like a lock to me.
I love it. I love it. Speaking of Wisconsin, you mentioned them, and I have to turn it over to my boy and my dog, Brandon, since he has that 8.5 or 9 win total on Wisconsin. They stumbled last week against Ohio State. They open as an 8.5 point favorite against Indiana, but it is in Bloomington. Brandon, I'd love to hear where your head is at specifically on this week, but also the season win total.
All right, yeah. Braylon Allen's health is going to be a huge factor if I take a spread in this game. If he's healthy, I have no worries that Wisconsin will definitely take care of business. I think we're getting a little bit of an overreaction from Indiana's close game at Penn State. And I think Wisconsin looked a lot better than the score indicated in Madison last week. So I think Wisconsin's going to cover this 8.5, especially if Braylon Allen's good to go. And with regards to our over on the win total, it's still alive. And we're big favorites this week. We can only take it 1 week at a time. And until they lose that fourth game, we're going to be riding with it, baby.
We love it. We'll love it. Brant, we'll turn it back to you. Over-under is 44.5. You seem like the over-under guy. Will you be touching this game?
I'm not the over-under guy. I'm just the under guy. This is Big Ten football. Again, 45 is very high for two just putrid offenses that make you want to gouge your eyes out. It's another free one for me. Wisconsin and Indiana, they can't move the football. They both play decent defense, I guess. Decent is what we can say for Indiana. I mean, they have a good enough defense to stop Mr. Locke, whatever his name is. Not a good quarterback. It's a walking free bet. Just throw the house on it again.
Yeah, I would agree. This is a bounce back game for Wisconsin for sure. With what Brandon was saying, I think Wisconsin played a lot better than what the score ended up being last weekend, and vice versa. I think Indiana played out of their shoes last weekend to keep it close. But Chris, I'd love to hear if you have any last thoughts on this game. If you'll be betting it.
Yeah, hate to pump the brakes on the Wisconsin train. I do like Indiana to cover here. I think Soares looked pretty solid against what we talked about as potentially the top defense in the nation. I think they've taken steps forward. I also just think if you're leaning under, I think that also leans somewhat towards Indiana plus 9.5. In these low scoring ball games, you're getting a team with multiple scores. I think Indiana keeps this somewhat close. I don't know if Wisconsin's going to be healthy enough. I think they had some injuries outside of just Braylon Allen that concern me, with DK as well. I don't know if he'll play. So I do like Indiana to keep this game close at that 9.5 point number. It's 31% public as well. So a little bit of a public fade. I do think at home they're able to keep this within 2 scores.
I like it. I like the thought process. We'll have to see what comes Saturday. But to close out the noon slate, we have the Nebraska Cornhuskers. You know, Brandon's been on that Rule Aid, got me on, has gotten Brand on during the season. And they're going up to East Lansing. They open as a 3-point favorite. And surprisingly, not the lowest over-under for the week at 34.5. Chris, we'll stay with you. How are you feeling about this game?
Yeah, Nebraska last week was our bet of the week, and they played their best game of the season. They looked very good. I think Harburg is slowly developing as a quarterback. They're starting to get a little bit of a rhythm on offense, mostly running the ball, but they did have a deep pass at one point that they were able to break off. Nebraska is 91% public. I think a lot of people have been listening to us and our thought of we're Michigan State until Michigan State shows us something. And to this point, Michigan State really has not been able to do that. Granted, at the end of that game in Minnesota, they brought in a true freshman quarterback, Sam Levitt, who drove them down the field, scored, got the ball back. They drove down the field, almost beat my 16.5 under. He did throw an interception in the red zone to keep that locked. But I do think that brings a little bit of a dimension to this Michigan State offense we haven't seen of being able to move the football forward and get past the yellow marker. That being said, I really do still lean towards Nebraska. I find it hard to bet against them with how they look right now. This would make them bowl eligible, and it's really hard to bet on Michigan State. One pivot I like for this, if you're nervous about the 91% spread, would be the first half under for Michigan State team total of 7.5 points. That is a tongue twister, but I do feel, I don't know if I can't see them out the gate coming out and scoring twice. I don't see them coming over that 7.5 point number. I see this being another low scoring game. And I think taking Michigan State under that 7.5 feels pretty safe.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great bet, especially with the game total being under 35. I don't think this is going to be a shootout like we've seen in the Big 12. Brandon, we're going to get to you. This is your team, but Brant, we'll pivot to you first. Are you betting the under?
Yeah, absolutely. I am. Again, another one. Unders are making us money this week. But going off of what Chris said, Nebraska -3 just seems so easy and so free. It almost makes you want to take Michigan State. But no, I don't think I can do that to myself.
Okay.
I mean, 3 points, like I would think this would be more of like a 7-point spread. Like I don't know. Something a little sketchy, a little off with that. And then the 91% on Nebraska. But it's just a bet that seems so free. Like there's no way Michigan State's gonna go compete, right? We say that just for us to get our hearts. It's Nebraska. They're gonna break our hearts. It's what they do. They're also 5-3 right now, if I'm not wrong.
Yep. Yes, they are.
Which means they have to win one more game to get into bowl eligibility, which they're probably not gonna do because it's Nebraska. So you know what? I'll toss that hammer down right now. Let's go Michigan State money line.
Wow.
They got to win one at some point.
in the Big Ten.
They've got to win one at some point. They've got to win one eventually. They play Indiana still. That's probably more likely to be the one than this one. But why not? I'm feeling bold.
Wow. Just in time for Brandon. He's been on the Roulade all goddamn season. Brandon, where are you at on this game? And do you have anything to say to our CEO?
I mean, do they have to win a game, Brian? I know, let's be honest here. I'm not so sure they do because this team is awful. I mean, this is a perfect storm. We get the Roulade back rolling in full motion, and we get to fade MSU again until they show us that they don't need to be faded. It's a perfect storm. I'm hammering Nebraska -3. This is going to be, hey, it could be 100% public. I'm still taking Nebraska -3, boy. It's too easy.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Now moving into 3:30 games, we've got the Nittany Lions visiting Maryland, and they open as 8.5-point spreads, over under at 50.5. Brandon, we'll start with you. Where's your head at on this game, and will you be betting?
I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to bet this game yet, but if I did have to go one way, I'd go Penn State. Maryland has just looked so poor since that first half against Ohio State. They've been turning the ball over at an alarming rate, and I think that Penn State defense is going to want to show, hey, It was a fluke last week. This week, we're going to show up. We're going to show out, and we're going to get back on track. So if I had to bet it, I'd say Penn State minus the points, but I'm not sure if I'm going to pull the trigger yet.
Yep, I'm in the same boat. Brent, how are you feeling about this game, and will you pull the trigger on it?
Yeah, I do like Penn State to cover this one. Maryland has just looked hapless out there. They've looked just shaken defensively specifically. And Penn State's defense didn't look great last week. They gave up a lot of big plays against Indiana. I know that's kind of how Maryland's offense thrives is on big plays, but I think that's one thing that Manny Diaz is going to kind of hammer in this week is, hey, let's not give up those big plays. And I still think Penn State has the talent to kind of pull it together defensively. So I could see them going and covering that pretty comfortably. I think they could bounce back this week. And I will be taking yet another under at 51. I don't know. I can't. I don't believe in Drew Aller. I haven't all season long. And even though Maryland doesn't have the best defense, I still see this game going under 51.
Interesting. I just felt like Maryland had somewhat of a firepower of an offense, but I forget who mentioned it on this show. It might have been Chris just mentioning that like the first 5 games, Maryland comes out looking like a whole new team. And then as soon as they play someone, they just hit gravel and don't look like the same team. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you. Where are you going to be placing bets if you are on this game?
You guys nailed my exact thoughts. Don't know if I'll bet it. Would lean Penn State. Usually I would say it could be a little bit of a look ahead for Penn State with them playing Michigan next week. But this team can't really afford to look ahead. I think in the Indiana game, they learned their lesson on that. I think they do need to focus in and they need to look good going into this Michigan game. They have their entire season rides on that. So I would lean towards them covering this spread. But then again, I also think Maryland could bounce back. I think if Maryland doesn't turn the ball over as much as they have, that's a better team than maybe they've been able to play to. So kind of an avoid for me.
Yeah, I think I'm staying far away from this one, just because it's 2 teams that need to prove something. Maryland with bowl eligibility and Penn State to say, hey, no, we're ready for Michigan. We're ready to beat. So it'll be interesting to see how this weekend goes, and I think it has a lot of implications on next week. But getting into our next game, the closest spread of the week. Pretty surprising. We have Illinois at Minnesota, opens at Minnesota -1.5. Feel like both of these teams have shown flashes of really good football, but also flashes of what are we doing on the field. So, Brandon, I'll start with you. Over under 42.5, Minnesota -1.5. Will you be betting? How are you feeling?
Minnesota, man, they're in the thick of the race for the Big Ten West crown, and I just don't see them dropping this game at home to an Illinois team who's been extremely underwhelming this year. I think I'm gonna bet more so maybe the money line with something rather than the 1.5. It's stupid probably, but I think they cover the short number. If I had to bet the 1.5, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think Illinois has had its flashes, but Minnesota has more ahead in the season that they have to prove. So I agree there. Don't know if I love betting on this game. Brant, would love to hear your thoughts if you're going to be touching this game or not.
Yeah, I kind of lean the same way towards Minnesota here. I mean, yeah, both teams just like you mentioned, there's a lot of question marks. But with it being a home game, I think that gives Minnesota a bit of an edge. And Illinois has disappointed a bit more than Minnesota has, in my opinion. Minnesota's also just been playing better football as of late. So we're gonna follow that recent trend and go with the Gophers. I'm actually surprised it's so close. I'd expect more of like a 3 to 5 point spread. But yeah, I think it should be Minnesota here pretty easily and maybe a close game, but not a 1 point close game.
Yeah. Yep. Chris, anything to add here before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it. I like Minnesota. They have the better ability to run the football. They have dominant O-line. Usually teams that run the ball well tend to continue to run the ball well. So I think they'll do a good job of taking the lead and being able to hold on to it.
Awesome. Now, Brant, I'm going to start with you here. This was, I believe, the lowest historic over-under open ever. It has since moved up 1 point, but we have the Iowa Hawkeyes playing Northwestern at Wrigley Field, so it technically is a neutral site. But Iowa is favored -5, but the over-under 30.5 was 29.5, and I just want to know, are you betting that goddamn under?
Yeah, it seems like every single week Iowa sets a new record with the new record low under. And they hit every time because this offense cannot move the football. This punter is absolutely electric. He flips the field like nobody else. And the defense is full of a bunch of beasts. They don't give up big plays. And I don't trust Northwestern to move the football either. I know they've shown they can, but not against this Iowa defense. So yeah, the under is pretty free here, and I'm happy to roll with it. Yet another under. Have not said the word over yet on this show.
No, no, you have not, which is pretty remarkable. But I'll turn it over to Chris. How are you feeling about this game? Are you going to be betting either team, or are you just going to be staying away from this one?
Yeah, by far the weirdest game of the entire football season, given that it's Iowa versus Northwestern, and this game is being played at Wrigley Field of all places. I would lean towards Iowa covering the spread in this game. I think Iowa's a team that's a lot better than they're given credit for, just because their offense does really struggle, but this defense has been so solid that it's so hard to be able to put points up against them, and they're able to flip field position so well that I could see this being a sloppy 14-3 type football game. Definitely not one I can say we're going to be watching. I think that might be more of a check the highlights afterwards. It'll be an interesting
Yeah.
again in this wild Big Ten West. Both these teams are still in it, so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon, anything to add on this game?
Under.
Yeah, you're slamming the under?
That's it. Bet the under.
I'm right there with you. I think this is going to be absolute, like Chris was saying, just slop. This is going to be a hard-nosed Big Ten West football game that I'm going to stay so far away from watching any of it, but bet the under. Live a little, have a little fun. Now, to close out our football slate, we have the Purdue Boilermakers heading up to the Big House. Not much going for Purdue. They open as a 32.5 underdog, and the line is only 50.5. So we've got a lot going on here. Brandon, how are you feeling about this game? Are you taking Michigan on that big of a line?
My notes say, sorry, Purdue, period. This is going to be a massacre. I honestly probably will lay the points because Michigan is just far and away so much better than Purdue is this year. They're going to feast on the turnovers. They're going to run it down their throats. It's going to be a rough look for them. So, yeah, I'll probably be laying the 32.5. I know it's a massive number, but this is a very growing pains year for Purdue. So,
yeah, I totally agree. They have not looked like the same Purdue that could knock off Ohio State or Penn State in recent years. It just doesn't seem like the same team. Chris, where's your head at on this game?
Yeah, I look at this game. I see a Michigan team that has a big game next week against Penn State. I don't know how long the starters are really going to be out there to be able to cover such a massive spread. That being said, there's no part of me that wants to bet Purdue the way they've looked. So this isn't a void for me. One pivot I do like in this game that's an interesting number. We're actually going to go to the player props. JJ McCarthy under 0.5 interceptions. He only has 3 this year. This to me looks like a game that Michigan's going to beat up on these guys. There shouldn't be much of a reason for JJ to force passes down the field. Purdue's secondary, as we've talked about, is really poor. I could see this being a game where JJ only has 20 attempts. They kind of run it down their throat, stick to a basic game plan, not to show Penn State anything. And JJ's benched in the fourth quarter, and that bet's tucked away. So McCarthy under 0.5 interceptions, a little juicy at minus 170, but definitely like that player prop for this game.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. I might have to tell you on that one. I didn't even look into that. Brant, how you feeling about this game? You gonna put some money on it?
I mean, how I'm feeling about this game, I'm just pissed off that we get to watch Michigan beat up on a shitty team every Saturday night. Can we stop putting Michigan against Bowling Green, against Purdue, against all these ass opponents at night? Like, come on, these games scream noon. Why are we watching it at when we want to be watching good football?
It should
Regardless,
be Rutgers, Ohio State in
yeah,
the
if
night
anything,
one.
that's
Like,
a
what in the
much
world?
more intriguing game than this dog shit. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, I also think that Michigan's going to cover that spread. It's a really big spread, but Purdue has just been awful. They don't have a good defense. Michigan's just going to have their way with them, and there's no chance Connor Stallions hasn't stolen a few Purdue signs. They're going to know their every play call. Don't even need Connor on the sideline at this point. Like Jesse Minner probably has it locked away. So yeah, and I'm going to take the over.
Wow.
First
The
time.
first over of the week.
First one of the week. I think Michigan has a chance to even cover
50
that.
and a half.
I think Michigan could cover that on their own. I think they could put up like 52 points and maybe Purdue puts up 7.
That is you have a lot of you really believe in this Michigan or offense. Like, you think that they can consistently put up those points even against an opponent like Purdue. I feel like they would have their sights, like Chris was mentioning, a little more set on next week's opponent in Penn State and making sure they lock that up. But I love the confidence.
I mean, yeah,
I think
there's
that's a great
that.
play.
There's that, but also at the same time, I feel like this is a team that's kind of pissed off. They were off last week. They were hearing all the noise about the whole sign stealing investigation. They want to go
Yeah,
out and prove something. They want to prove, hey, we can win football games without Connor Salient. But can they? We'll see.
especially with them opening at 3 and Ohio State at 1, knowing that they've beat them the last 2 years, I think just added even more fuel to the fire. So I think you might be right on there. I think you might have some play there with them just playing with a little more grit and energy because they've been a little disrespected this year. There's the outside noise adding to it. So that closes out our college football, but we got to get into just a quick sneak peek of college basketball. Are you guys excited? Come on. We just got our first AP poll of the year. This is going to be so much fun throughout the year. But just to start us off, the initial AP poll had 3 Big Ten teams ranked in it. Number 3, Purdue, followed by number 4, Michigan State. And then to cap us out, number 25, Illinois. Brant, we'll start with you. Are you shocked by any teams being left out? Did you like the rankings? And do you have any futures that you want to give us just very, very early for our viewers?
Yeah, well, first off, I just want to say keep an eye out for the big banter poll because that's the real poll. We disregard the AP poll. We don't care about it. Are there 3 teams in the AP poll? Sure, but how many will be in the big banter poll? That's what we really need to tune in for.
That's
Because
what matters.
I feel like there could be another team or two that sneaks in there. That Maryland Terrapins team is kind of sneaky good under the radar. Could definitely snag a spot. I do think those 3 that are in there, obviously Purdue and Michigan State are top 5 teams locked in. Will be interesting to see if one of them potentially earns that number 1 or number 2 spot in the big banter poll. And then Illinois is probably going to make the cut as well, which with maybe we do have a bit of Big Ten bias throughout our poll, but that there's no way Illinois is not going to be in there. Maryland probably makes the cut too. And then you never know, maybe somebody sneaks in like an Indiana or an Ohio State, dare I say. But yeah, as far as futures though, so I was looking for win total futures and I couldn't find anything out there. So I'm gonna stick with just my regular season Big Ten champion. I don't like putting preseason futures like this because I like to see a bit of basketball before
Yeah.
really placing bets like that. So don't tail me or do tail me cautiously because I didn't actually place this yet. But do want to say if I had to pick right now a regular season champion, I'd be lame and I go with the favorites. I go with Purdue to win the conference title this year, just because of how much they're returning. You get the 2 guards back, and you often see the biggest leaps in basketball from your freshman to your sophomore season, the biggest grow ups. And those 2 guys, Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, caused a lot of issues and a lot of havoc for Purdue down the stretch and caused them to lose a lot of games that they maybe shouldn't have. Fairleigh Dickinson, for example. But they also return a bunch of studs. Obviously Zach Edey, the national player of the year. And then Mason Gillis on the wing is a great veteran to have. Trey Kaufman-Ren's a guy who could also grow up a bit. But just the continuity that they have makes me confident that they're going to start the season really strong. And I mean, while they're doing that, the rest of the conference is all going to beat each other up.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Definitely your point with having freshman to sophomore big leaps is so true. You see that almost among every team. Just like the experience, having that game minutes and just being in those actual moments can mean so much for a team that returns a lot of starters. Brandon, do you have a preseason favorite for the Big Ten yet, or is it too early?
I will be playing 2 plays actually for the preseason. I'll probably play something in the middle of the season as well. I have a rule. I can't really go for the favorite, so I'm going to be going with the second favorite, Michigan State. And like Brant said, with his Purdue Boilermakers, Michigan State's returning a lot as well, and they have a very good recruiting class coming in. And I don't know if anyone watched this past week, Tennessee, Michigan State in a secret televised scrimmage. It was a absolute Final Four type battle of something we might see this season in the NCAA tournament. Both teams looked phenomenal, and I cannot wait to see how they end up. And I do think Michigan State at plus, I think it was 260, has a decent
300.
amount of value. They're going to be there. They're going to be there at the end of the season in that top three. I can just about guarantee. And I think they're going to be the ones to take the crown. And then Illinois is probably my value play at about plus 11, plus 1200. Terrence Shannon Jr. is a phenomenal player. They bring in Quincy Guerrier, who's we've seen at Rutgers now, Oregon. He's just lanky. He's very good as well. And I think it's hard to win at Illinois, man. So they're going to be a value play, probably about quarter unit rather than a full unit play for the Spartans.
Yeah, I love that. Love that, Chris. How are you feeling about this season? Any plays now, or are you going to save it until we get maybe 2 or 3 weeks in?
Yeah, I usually like to save it about 2 or 3 weeks and see what everybody looks like, see some out of conference battles. I did really like Brant's take on Purdue. They did return a lot. I also think Purdue's at a little bit of a discount. I think a lot of people look at the Farley Dickinson loss and think, oh, this is an overrated program. They lost to a 16 seed. And the last number 1 seed that lost to a number 16 seed went and won the entire tournament in Virginia. So that really does not concern me. If anything, I think that helps this team not look past others and start to, take every game a little bit more seriously. Sometimes that can be a good wake-up call. I have to agree with Brandon, though, on an early season Big Ten champ. I like Michigan State a lot. As he said, with the returning starters, they're returning 82% of their scoring from last year, and they're returning 77% of their minutes, which is a whopping number. And really, at the end of the day, too, I think they're the best coach team maybe in all of basketball. And I think certainly in the Big Ten, I think Izzo only has a couple more of these teams left. I think Izzo knows this team is very special with the amount of people he's returned and the recruiting class. I think it's hard to go against Michigan State. This team looked really good last year, battling injuries, and I think a healthy season this year. They're by far, I think, the best team in the Big Ten going into this.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with both of you. Brant, sorry I can't hop on the Boilermaker wave just yet. I just think that Michigan State has looked, and especially just with their coach. I know Matt Painter is an incredible coach, but I have seen him struggle especially in the NCAA tournament and March Madness. I just like Tom Izzo, I think, just more as a pure basketball coach, and that may just be bias. I don't know what, but I would have to agree. I just think that Michigan State, I know they're in this position a lot, but I just think that they have the right pieces this year. They've returned so much, and Tom Izzo is such a great recruiter. I think they have a fairly good chance of winning. I think it'll be between those two teams. I was a little shocked to see some of the bigger programs in the Big Ten not as highly ranked, and I feel like there's been a bit of a fall off in Big Ten basketball, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts before we close it out. We have no Wisconsin, Michigan, or Ohio State, who I think have been fairly decent within the last 5 years. Just your thoughts on how it's going to shake out down the stretch. Is it going to be the same old Big Ten where we beat each other up? Or will these top 2 or 3 teams kind of run away with it that we've seen maybe in the past year or so? Brant, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think same old Big Ten. We've seen it for the past 10 years where we've got a bunch of solid teams, but maybe not great teams that go and beat each other up. We get 8, 9 conference or tournament bids at the end of the season, and then everyone's gone by the Sweet 16. I don't know if that's much different this year. I think Purdue and Michigan State, just with what they're returning and how important that is when it comes to March, could maybe make a run in the tournament. But I don't really see any other team who can kind of make that step. And I do think that there's going to be a whole lot of just hard-nosed Big Ten ball. It's the same way in football that it is in basketball, where very low-scoring, gritty games, and we're going to be seeing a lot of that this season.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I'm not going to say that I'll miss Hunter Dickinson, but I'll miss the era of big boy ball with Kofi Coburn, Zed Key, Hunter Dickinson, like all Zach Edey, obviously, but just those tall, big, muscular centers that ran the Big Ten for the past 2 or 3 years. I think we might see a little step back from that. But Chris, love to hear your thoughts on how you think the Big Ten is really going to shake out as a conference.
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it. This is a conference that kind of beats up on themselves. I think it's a deep conference. I think there's, again, 7, 8 teams in this conference that could make their way into the tournament. And I think, too, this is a conference that tends to get better down the stretch. I do think they will improve. And once we get into conference play, when you play tough teams, you become better as a team. I know, granted, in the tournament, that hasn't maybe shaken out as well with them losing a lot. But I do think this is a year that a couple Big Ten teams could go deeper in the tournament just with how deep the Big Ten is. Playing these teams each and every week, it's going to make these teams better. And I think most of these Big Tens returned a good amount of starters. So there wasn't a ton of star players that left the Big Ten, which I think is exciting.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. I feel like it's a pretty good returning class that's coming back to the Big Ten. But Brandon, I'll turn it over to you. And I just want to hear, obviously, A, how you think it's going to turn out, but B, if there's any sleeper or team that you think could be kind of a troublemaker or disruptor this season that we should keep our eyes out as we continue week on week.
Okay, that's fair. Again, I think the boys made the correct point. This is going to be a cannibalistic conference. We have a lot of great teams that are just going to eat up on each other throughout the season. Doesn't mean they're bad. Doesn't mean they're super. I mean, I would like to see some teams separate themselves and go and be, 14-4 in conference. Really show that the Big Ten, yes, we're a great conference. Yes, we have some great teams, but there are some national contenders in this conference, and I think there are. And a team that I think is going to be you don't want to play them any night. It's going to be Maryland, man. They are going to be a hassle against every team they face. You're not going into College Park and coming out with a win very often, unless maybe Michigan State, maybe Purdue. I'd lean there, but anyone else going there, I'm giving Maryland the win, and they're going to steal some wins as well.
Yeah, I don't know if it's recency bias or not, but I feel like Maryland or Illinois just always has a group of guards that give you trouble in the backcourt and just make the full 90 feet of court, that hardwood, just so much harder to play a coherent offense or a coherent game of basketball. So that's what I'm really interested for, because I feel like the Big Ten, obviously it's cannibalistic. That's just what it is. But I agree with Brandon. I hope some teams can pull away and kind of show, hey, this is a different year. We're really here on the national presence. But I still think that a team like Maryland or a team that's just like scrappy, honestly, I think it could become one of those like Big Ten, like East teams where it's like Ohio State, Michigan, one of those just like Penn State, where it's like you've seen Ohio State go into Penn State and stumble on the road, where it's just like all of these home environments are so formidable that I'm just so excited for this season. It's going to be so much fun. Did any of you guys have anything to add? Football, basketball, anything Big Ten related? You want to give any Heisman hopefuls or anything like that?
Before we go, I forget if we've already touched on this in the past episode, but before it's too late, take Marvin Harrison Jr. to win the Heisman. Just do it. Put your wallet on it. Because if Ohio State beats Michigan and it's 12-0 at the end of the year, you can't not give him the Heisman, because he is the best player. He is the best player in college football, and he's putting up the numbers to prove it.
But the only thing that I have to say is right now, the LSU wide receiver whose name is escaping me has more yards and touchdowns. Yeah. Absolute dog.
Yeah, I like the Marvin Harrison take. I have him at 25-1 odds right now to win the Heisman. The only thing that concerns me is these Pac-12 quarterbacks are not going away. I think Bo Nix is somebody to look on the stretch as a quarterback if Oregon continue to win out and the way they're playing. I think he's a guy that would be a popular Heisman pick. I think Penix has started to fade a little bit with a couple odd off games against tough teams. If they end up finishing undefeated, I think Penix has the best path. And then I think also too, I don't know how I feel about Ohio State going into Ann Arbor yet and beating Michigan. So we'll have to see. But I do think Marvin Harrison absolutely has a path there. I think the easiest pass, and really this is a 4-man race right now of Marvin, JJ, Bo Nix, and Penix. I don't see any of these other guys really being able to push into that. But I do think that it is very well a chance if the Pac-12 kind of beats up on itself that the Heisman could be up for grabs in Ann Arbor.
A 2024 Big Ten team will have the Heisman winner. I'll tell you that.
Wow, we're not going to tell you who. So you guys are going to have to guess
One of
as
those
the
four.
viewers, or keep tuning in and week out for every game we will cover. We're going to switch it up a little bit as we go into the season. We may not dissect each and every game, but we're going to give you who we're betting and what lines we're taking, so all of our viewers can tail us throughout the season. But this should be up tomorrow around
dogs,
noon
baby.
Eastern time. Oh yeah, so many dogs during basketball season. And then we'll have our pick'ems out Friday. Check us out on Twitter, Big Bookie BB, and also this will be live on YouTube and Spotify. And tune in next week. I'll see you boys soon.
Love it.